Perhaps it was his ambitious and charismatic personality, or his persuasive oratory skills, or maybe his seemingly innovative and immediate solutions to the Italian post-war climate. Benito Mussolini, also known as Il Duce, successfully intoxicated Italy and all of Europe with his desires and beliefs while ruling as prime minister from 1922 until 1943. Despite being the founder of the fascist regime, which was all about ultranationalism, Mussolini in the end was another dictator that got too caught up in self-absorbance and opportunities as he struggled to maintain his own power and in the end only did harm to Italy and her people. The people eventually saw through his crimes. The dictator, who devoted his whole life to controlling the Italian people, met a terrible fate at their hands. He and his mistress were shot dead and hung by their ankles in the Piazza Loreto, a public square in Milan, on April 28, 1945. To meet such a terrible death, there must have been a limit to the true extent of his power over the Italian people. Mussolini had aimed to achieve a totalitarian state through fascist ideology. But to what extent did he successfully achieve a totalitarian state? Totalitarianism is a socio-political system driven by an ideology and seeks control over all aspects of public activity, political, economic, and social by a single state. It is an extreme version of authoritarianism, which is a system of rule in which the single power holder, dictator, monopolizes political power. For the totalitarian regime, the dictator uses charisma over the people with his ideals, completely controlling their thoughts and actions. With this follows propaganda and terror as means of suppression and persuasion. According to Frederick and Brzezinski's theoretical model of a totalitarian state, it has 6 key features. Number 1 is the existence of an official ideology to which general adherence is demanded, the ideology intended to achieve a perfect final stage of mankind. For Italy, the ideology was fascism. Benito Mussolini founded the Fasci di Combattimento on March 23, 1919. The early fascist ideology was applied as a political movement in which it combined ultranationalism and hostility towards left-wing parties and established conservatism. It emphasized masculinity, youth, and imperial expansion. Mussolini did manage to make fascism the official state ideology by gradually transforming Italy into a single-party state. However, the fascist party did not instantly capture the public's eye. Initially, the party had 870 members. They were mocked by the socialists and unpopular in elections. However, the post-war climate had been favorable to the fascist party. After the Paris peace conferences, people had lost faith in Orlando and his government. They felt that Italy had not gained her fair share in contrast to the casualties of World War I. Mussolini promised the people that he would recreate the glories of the Roman Empire, note, perfect final stage of mankind. People were also starving, there were debts to be paid, and unemployment was a huge deal. This left people leaning towards extremist political parties that provided immediate solutions to the economic crises. That's why there was a constant fear of rising socialism, especially to the middle and upper class citizens. For them, fascism was particularly favorable as it was a right-winged party that emphasized corporatism and therefore didn't threaten their positions in society. Mussolini used this opportunity. Things changed at the end of 1920 with the establishment of paramilitary armed squads. These squads, also known as the Black Shirts, used violence against rural socialist labor leagues and striking urban workers. This tide soon turned. In October 1921, Mussolini formed the National Fascist Party with 200,000 members and 35 parliamentary deputies. By 1922, the government increasingly relied on the Fascist Party to suppress left-wing unrest. In return, he insisted on significant cabinet representation. By mid-October, Mussolini fully had the power to become prime minister himself. The only thing stopping him would be military force, but even the king, Victor Emmanuel II, was unsure whether the military would be willing to fire on the fascists. So on October 28th, the Black Shirts marched on Rome. Even though it was poorly organized and armed, the move confused the king. The king offered Mussolini, who had stayed behind in Milan, to form a coalition government. And so on October 31st, Mussolini became the Prime Minister of Italy. From then on, he appointed himself as Il Duce, which literally means the leader. His 300,000 members of the fascist party bloated up to 780,000, although many of these new members joined the winning side instead of their own political interests. With this, he was one step closer to making fascism the official state ideology. However, despite his new government and status, he still had a weak parliamentary presence. In the lower chamber, the fascists had only 7% of the seats. Mussolini needed to come up with a plan that would provide both majority of the parliamentary seats and ensure that his government wouldn't be replaced by another. Fortunately enough, post-war Italy was politically very unstable. The people were in constant fear of political clashes. Mussolini's new parliamentary system meant that the party with the largest amount of votes would automatically receive 2/3 of the parliamentary seats. The people were convinced that this would bring political stability to the government. His new parliamentary system was passed, and with his fascist government winning 66.3% of the votes in elections of April 1924, Mussolini's plan had succeeded. He was one step closer to achieving a single-state party. Once again, in the summer of 1924, an opportunity arose for Mussolini. Giacomo Matteotti, a socialist politician and a parliament, openly discredited Mussolini in recent elections, stating that it was nothing but corruption and imitation. Matteotti's constant threats eventually resulted in his death on June 10, 1924. Mussolini denied all accusations of him being involved in the murder. Much to Mussolini's luck, his opposing parties, furious, walked out on the chamber and refused to take part in any of its procedures any longer. By then, Mussolini was an acknowledged dictator, and in 1939, by completely abolishing the parliament, Mussolini achieved a single-party state in Italy. This proves another point in Frederick's model for totalitarianism, a single-mass party hierarchically organized, closely interwoven with the state bureaucracy, and typically led by one man. However, going back to fascism, the extent of its popularity is very difficult for historians to determine. Sure, although the majority of Italians did favor it, and it was the state ideology, contemporary historians state that the people tolerated Mussolini and his regime so that they could live a better life. An example of this would be Mussolini's attempt to control the Italians' leisure time. He proposed several activities and holidays for the Italians. Yet the high participation in these activities weren't due to their loyalty to the state, but simply escaping the hardships of their everyday lives. As Martin Clark stated, but there was little enthusiasm for fascism, and the regime's claims to be totalitarianism were laughable. The fascists totally failed to arouse warlike zeal among the general population, a failure which became very evident in the 1930s. In short, there was acceptance but no devotion, consensus but no commitment. This was the vital flaw that stopped Italy from gaining acceptance as a totalitarian state. One way in which Mussolini attempted to control the public's morale and social lives was the control of propaganda, which can be argued as one of the few things Mussolini actually successfully achieved. This is the third point in Frederick's model for fascism, a monopoly of the means of effective mass communication. Mussolini used radio, magazines, rallies, speeches, cinema, newspapers, posters, culture, and art in his propaganda. Mussolini had been the editor of a high-profile socialist magazine, Avantil, in his earlier days, and understood the effects the media had on people. With this in mind, he later created the Il Popolo d'Italia magazine, and became the editor-in-chief to effectively exploit information and influence the public consciousness about fascism. Censorship was also a big deal. All opposing newspapers were seized. Only registered journalists approved by the fascist party could write for the press. When the Italian economy took a bad turn, Mussolini publicized public work projects and technological advances which gave hope to the people. Mussolini was able to manipulate the people by making them believe false achievements and results of his policies. He also hoped to strengthen nationalist feelings with his cult of personality. Another way in which Mussolini attempted to control the public was by terror. This is the fourth point in Frederick's model for fascism, a system of terroristic police control. After the March on Rome, Mussolini disposed his Squadrissimo. Instead, he formed the fascist militia. It was funded by public money, and the majority of its members were party members, usually ex-Squadrissimos. The militia suppressed opposing extremists, as well as gave Mussolini a military presence. This was effective in using terror as means of making people not just accept him, but also follow him and worship him as a ruler. The militia members provided a bodyguard for Mussolini, paraded at public ceremonies, and guarded public buildings. However, the military for Italy was an autonomous structure that pledged their alliance to the king until 1940. Mussolini was forced to pursue policies that were acceptable to the military leaders. Although the passiveness of the king did help Mussolini and his control of the armed forces, Mussolini did not fully achieve monopolistic control of the armed forces, a fifth term in Frederick's model for totalitarianism. This was clearly seen in World War II, as the military dropped support for Mussolini's regime in times of crisis. In fact, there was a lot of autonomous institutions in fascist Italy. The most prominent one was the Roman Catholic Church. Just the existence of it threatened the loyalty of the people towards fascist Italy. The Church held great influence over the people. Furthermore, it was not hesitant in voicing its oppositions in Mussolini's policies. That's why Mussolini seemed more than willing to please it, which fundamentally made Italy somewhat incapable of achieving a totalitarian state. An example of this was the Lateran Treaty. The Lateran Treaty gave profits, land, and benefits to the Church, as well as the Concordat, a part of the treaty, made the Roman Catholic Church faith into a state religion. As Martin Clark stated, the Church was the biggest obstacle to a totalitarian regime in Italy. The Church was granted a lot of economic benefits, but Mussolini had the power to do so because his government completely dominated the economy. They had power over prices, wages, production levels, and investment. This is the sixth term of Frederick's model for totalitarianism: central control and direction of the entire economy. Although Mussolini's corporate state did earn a lot of support from the landowners and upperclassmen, Mussolini did not pursue a single, consistent economic theory. Instead, he used his totalitarian slogans and introduced several economic policies to affect the economy or to divert the attention of the people. However, even though Mussolini achieved seizing control of the economy, historians do not regard this as a significant step in achieving a totalitarian state, as all dictators have planned and controlled economies. In fact, the most important factor in a government to become totalitarian is the control and absolute loyalty of the people. However, Mussolini's limit was clearly revealed in World War II with the Allied invasions. His government met an abrupt end as the people of Italy turned against him, outraged by the suffering caused by the war. In the end, his own Grand Council voted him out of power and was publicly arrested. the public much being relieved. Perhaps it was his ambiguous policies, or his half-hearted approach to the autonomous institutions in Italy, or maybe even the fact that the whole of his power rested on propaganda. Despite his numerous claims to have established a totalitarian state, the reality had shown elsewise.